Hello and welcome to episode 112 of MMO Weekly, presented as always by Chitty's Cheesesteaks. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, joined by longtime friend, MMO executive editor, trade deadline extraordinaire, busy man this time of year, Mike Mayer. Mike, thanks for coming on the show, man. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. The Mets had a busy day and hopefully another busy day tomorrow.
Absolutely. Like you said, Mets had a couple of relievers today, Tyler Rogers, and then a little while ago, Ryan Hensley from the Cardinals, flamethrower there and a submariner. You got to feel good as far as now the back end of that bullpen, high leverage guys that they added down the stretch here. Not having to see guys like Ryan Stanek maybe in bigger situations all the time. We obviously know that the trade deadline ends tomorrow, but I think this is definitely a good start here with less than 24 hours to go.
Yeah, the Mets added two high leverage pieces. Rogers more of a setup guy and Helsley more of a closer, but talk about two guys that couldn't be more complete opposite, right? Helsley's in the 99th percentile for fastball velocity, and Rogers is in the 1 percentile. They both get guys out at an elite level, just very different ways.
Sure.
And look, that gives Rogers in particular gives the Mets bullpen a different look. They already have some hard throwers with Diaz and Stanek that you mentioned, but either way, this just lengthens a bullpen that has certainly struggled once they had the injuries that hit earlier in the year. So now that they've kind of replenished those guys, and even, I mean, they've certainly improved upon that, especially with a guy like Helsley, who has such a long history of being a successful closer for the Cardinals. I mean, I tweeted out the stat that since 2021, there's only 5 guys in baseball that have at least 100 saves and an ERA under 3, and now the Mets have 2 of them in Helsley and Diaz.
Wow.
So that just gives Mendoza so much flexibility as they're going down the stretch, and then obviously you're assuming in the playoffs too. And that's not even talking about Soto, who they just got last week, who's been one of the better left-handed relievers in the game this year. So, yeah, I mean, I know we're going to break down each deal as they go, but as an overall, you can just see how much better the Mets bullpen looks right now than it did when the day started.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's nice also now, guys like Reed Garrett, who they really have leaned on so much. It feels like almost like a right-handed Pedro Feliciano at times. He pitches so much. You worry guys with that much wear and tear, falter down the stretch there, and rightfully so, kind of getting ridden the way he is. So like you said, to get 2 high leverage back end guys like they did, a setup man and another closer. And the stat you mentioned is incredible there. And not to mention, to give Diaz a lot of credit for he's fully back from that knee injury from a couple of years ago. That seems to be fully behind him. He's got his 2022 stuff back, which is amazing to see. But yeah, in a league that covets high leverage arms, and obviously the Phillies did the same too. Getting Duran from the Twins, their closer. It's fun to see. It's a little arms race, literally, right, with the trades that happened today. But I think the Mets, did the right thing, addressed needs that hopefully will benefit them, late into September and October. But I want to just kind of go over, like you said, the deals, kind of, just what they gave up. I want to start with Rogers. Do you think that it's one of those things where did they give up a little too much for that player? I know Buto's gone and a couple other guys, Ryan, the outfielder as well, that they traded for. At the trade deadline for leverage arms, like you kind of have to overpay, right? And especially, I don't want to call it the Steve Cohen tax, but the teams understand what the Mets are dealing with, and no one's going to be giving, I think, the Mets any sweetheart deals here. But I just kind of want to get your thoughts on the package the Mets gave up to start with Rogers.
Yeah, I think Mets fans kind of reacted pretty quickly to it just because Blade Tidwell, Drew Gilbert, and Jose Buto were all 3 names they're very familiar with. Tidwell and Buto have both pitched in the big leagues, and Gilbert, they acquired a couple of deadlines ago and had high hopes for him. So I think it was more name recognition that kind of got the reaction that it did. I definitely don't think they overpaid. I think it's a good package for the Giants, but in reality, Gilbert has struggled overall in AAA. His defense has kind of fallen off a little bit too, so he's probably He's more of a corner guy at this point, and he doesn't really have enough power to be a starting corner guy. So he's more of a like a fourth outfielder type. Blade Tidwell, we've seen him a little bit this year. He started most of his career, but I think he's really going to end up in the bullpen in the major leagues, if that's where he ends up at all. And Buto, I mean, Buto's had a couple of seasons where he's helped the Mets, that's for sure. But he's out of options. He's struggled recently, and when you're out of options, and you're struggling, that makes it really tough for the GM or president of baseball ops to keep you around. At some point, those are the type of guys that potentially get DFA'd. So, look, Buto's been up and down. He's had some good spurts for the Mets, but Rogers has been in the league for quite a while now and has a long stretch of being very good. So I think it was a fair price. I think maybe Mets fans were thinking a little too highly of Gilbert and Tidwell and maybe even Buto. But for me, it really comes down to Drew Gilbert for Tyler Rogers. And I think the Mets, when you're trying to win a championship, certainly got the better of that end. And look, it's a rental piece, but that's what it costs. I think maybe Mets fans are also underplaying how good Rogers is simply because he doesn't throw hard. It's a guy
Sure.
who's got a 1.8 ERA this year. He's got the highest ground ball percentage in baseball. His barrel percentage is the lowest in baseball, with Diaz third right behind him. So this is a guy that's just not giving up hard contact at all. And obviously that modes pretty well for when you're pitching in high leverage situations. So yeah, I think more of the overreaction was simply because of the name recognition of the prospects that the Mets gave up.
Yeah, like you said, the numbers speak for themselves. A sub 2 ERA is a sub 2 ERA. And for a rental like that, that's, the pieces you're going to have to give up. I agree. It's not like I could say much I know about Gilbert. I saw that he struggled a bit in AAA. I didn't realize that he was kind of movable as far as that goes. Obviously they got him in the trade a couple of years ago when they flipped Verlander and Scherzer. But, this is what you have to do. Championship teams have to do that, right? And like you said, he may not throw hard or whatever, but it's a different look that's super effective. And just again, as many quality arms in that bullpen as you can have for a stretch run, deep into the summer, into the fall. I'm all for it. So that being said, kind of with Hensley, it's, I guess, the opposite, right? I don't know if maybe everyone knows about the prospects the Mets gave up. I'm wondering if maybe you can kind of fill us in there. We know the player there, right? The opposite, flamethrower, all-star closer, the whole deal. But just kind of maybe fill us in on what the Mets gave up to acquire an arm like that.
Yeah, so the best prospect they gave up all day was Jesus Baez, who's the headliner
Okay.
for Helsley. I had him ranked 7th overall in the Mets system before the trade. And look, he's a good prospect. He had knee surgery last year, and the explosiveness hasn't been quite the same this year off knee surgery. But he's still a good prospect. But again, this is, like you said, this is a high leverage all-star reliever. You're going to have to give up a good prospect to get that type of player back. Nate Dome was one of the pitchers. I had him ranked 17th, and then Frank Ilisalt I had ranked 37th. So look, the Mets have done a really good job since Stearns took over of developing pitchers. We saw it last trade deadline where they dealt pitching to get what they needed for their needs going into the offseason. They were going to do this again. Look, they traded Wellington Aracena for Soto. They're going to continue to do it. They did it today with Dome. They did it today with Ilisalt. They're probably going to do it when they get a bat. There's going to likely be a pitcher in there. The Mets are drafting pitching really well and developing pitching really well. They just did it again in their most recent draft. They got a ton of arms that they like, and they keep plugging these guys in and turning into guys that have value at the deadline. And look, that's part of being a club that the Mets are right now, and hopefully in the long term, is you want to develop these guys like the Jonah Tongs, Nolan McLean's, Brandon Sprouts, that hopefully help you at the big league level.
Sure.
but
Sure.
they're not all going to help you specifically at the big league level. Some of them are going to have to be used as trade pieces, and that's what Stearns is doing, and that's what he's done with the Mets. And I think he's done it really well in getting value out of their draft picks and the players that they developed. I think you can't. I definitely would. I mean, if we're giving out grades, I would give that trade an A+ because of just the type of piece they were able to get back, and to have another guy that allows Mendoza now he has a two-headed monster out there now where he can use Helsley or Diaz in essentially any
Hmm.
situation, and then not be like, well, crap, who am I going to use in the ninth or the 10th if we get in this spot again? He's got that other guy. And like you
Hmm.
mentioned, now Reed Garrett, Ryan Stanek, those guys moved to like the sixth and seventh inning. And while they've struggled at times this year, those are two really good sixth and seventh inning relievers. Arguably, I mean, you're talking about if in that role, those guys are about as good as it gets in the major leagues. So not only do you obviously help strengthen the high leverage spots, you really strengthen those middle leverage spots because of the guys you can move down.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Lengthening out a bullpen like that, like you said, it just makes everything better. It gives more options for Mendoza, which is amazing, and it just keeps these guys fresher. Like I said, down the stretch to make this run here. So excited to see these two guys, in orange and blue now. At the back end there with Diaz and do their thing here for the rest of the summer. I want to switch to kind of the offense now. You still have, like I said, less than 24 hours left in this deadline. I personally don't think the Mets are done yet. I would like to see them maybe get an outfielder. I would love maybe another right-handed bat. I don't know if that's still in the cards with what they've now given up to kind of get to bolster the bullpen here. But I just kind of want to get your thoughts if there's anyone still on your radar that you'd like to see, or if you think maybe the Mets now kind of stand pat with what they have. Because over the last few days, I feel like you've seen Marfientos' name swirled around there and things like that. I'm just a little curious what you're thinking.
No, I think the Mets, I would be shocked if the Mets didn't get a bat by the end of the deadline. Specifically, probably going to be a center fielder. I mean, they could work in a second baseman too, because obviously Hal McNeil can play center field, and they do have Taylor who can play defensively in center. But I mean, we've seen the names of like Lewis Robert Jr., Cedric Mullins. There's some other names out there that aren't rentals that have been talked about too. But in the end, regardless of who the player is, I absolutely think the Mets get a bat, and I think they have the pieces still to do it. Like I said, Baez is the top prospects that they traded, and they still have a ton of guys in the 6 to 20 range still available in their system that I have ranked that I think they would certainly be willing to trade for an upgrade of the bat. And then if they want to go the controllable route, they do have pieces. I mean, McLean, Tong, and Sprout probably all aren't going to pitch in the big league level for the Mets, but they're big league pitchers. So it's certainly plausible that I think Tong is probably untouchable, but outside of him, I think in the right deal, obviously would have to be a good controllable bat or pitcher to trade McLean. But I think they would
Mm-hmm.
trade him, and I think they would also trade Sprout in the type of deal that upgrades their offense. Look, the Mets and Stearns have made it pretty clear that they're going to be aggressive this trade deadline, and they certainly want to win a championship. So if that means trading someone like a Brandon Sprout or potentially
Mm-hmm.
a Nolan McLean for a controllable bat, I don't think the Mets are going to shy away from that, maybe like they would have last year. I think Stearns is going to be more aggressive this year. And he certainly has. I mean, from the folks I've talked to, he's leaving no stone unturned. He's talked to a lot of different teams about a lot of different players. I know, like Joe Ryan is one that, again, long shot type thing, but they're at least calling on players like that. Ketel Marte, another long shot type of thing. But if you make someone like Nolan McLean or Jet Williams available, then you open up even more possibilities for those controllable bats. And look, I think he'll obviously look in the pitching market too. This is what Stearns does. he's not going to be satisfied with just getting what he's got. He's going to talk to other teams and see what is available out there. So long story short, yeah, Mets absolutely get a bat before the deadline ends tomorrow, and I'd have to imagine it's going to be a pretty impactful one.
Love that. Love that. Honestly, one name that jumps out at me, you talk about controllable. I love Brent Rooker. I don't know if they can, kind of swing a deal for a player like that who's got control. One of the better kind of power bats, young bats in the American League. But I would love a player like that. I know he's not a center fielder per se, but he's someone I would love to see as a right-handed hitter, kind of a little slugger, help Alonso out in the middle of that lineup. I guess that kind of brings me around to Mark Vientos, right? I know I've said it before, we've seen his name kind of swirled around there in trade talks. I don't know how you feel. I would be wary after what I saw last year of giving up so quick on a guy like that. It would have to be the right deal, perfect deal. I'm not swapping Roberts for Vientos. I'm not making a trade like that. I think that hurts the Mets ultimately. I'm just kind of curious what you think, with the struggles this year, what is, the league say about, I guess, his value at this point, or how the Mets kind of feel about him?
Yeah, I think one of the things that hurts Vientos, even if you think he's going to return to some of the offensive value that he brought last year, is that the league has now seen what he is defensively at third base. And that's a below average third baseman. So, really, any team that still wants his offense, you're thinking about first base DH. And quite honestly, he doesn't have a ton of experience at first base. And particularly at the major league level, he hasn't played there a ton. So, I think, look, there's certainly going to be teams that like his offensive potential, like what they saw last year. He swung the bat better recently, and I do think that he is the type of guy the Mets would potentially trade in for a rental bat. I think that's on the table. Acuna is another guy I think they would certainly trade in the right deal. I think he's shown what his value is, and that's a utility guy that plays good defense and has good speed. That has value,
Sure.
but it's certainly a guy that the Mets would be interested. They would at least talk to teams about trading if it helps them get a bat. Look, I don't think Brett Beatty or Ronnie Mauricio are off the table either. If you can get that type of return that makes you better this year and potentially past that, I think they would obviously like to keep Mauricio, just given the versatility of what he can be defensively and what he's shown lately with the bat. And same with Beatty
Sure.
because of what Beatty's shown defensively too. I think that brings a ton of value. But yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that Vientos or Acuna are available for the right upgrade.
Well, yeah, it has to, like you said, it has to be the right upgrade. I guess you don't want to get bit with that, but like you said, Stearns is leaving no stone unturned, especially after how close they got last year. It seems like you can't say so far it's one of those deadlines where they kind of sat on their hands haphazardly. Right, we'll see. We like what we have, and we'll go forward. This is a two arms that make a big impact, and it doesn't seem like they're done. So, it would be interesting. I don't know how the clubhouse would react to that. I know they all, seem to get along and gel with Vientos, but, at this point, whatever can make a championship run, it seems like Stearns is going to do that. So that should make Met fans happy.
Yeah, and look, if they trade Vientos, then you have Marte that can DH, Winker, if and when Winker comes back. So they
Right.
have options there. I just think Vientos is a tough fit, and particularly if they decide that they want to keep Alonso long term, then Vientos is essentially a non-fit. So, and look, if
Sure.
teams like him, I do think I would probably, if the White Sox wanted to try to do him straight up for Robert, I think that's probably the chance that the Mets have to take just because of what they need in center field. Look, McNeil's been valiant out there in his effort, but I think him at second base and an actual guy, a guy who's more familiar in center field makes them better. And I think, look, Robert has been on a really bad White Sox team for a long time. And the reality of that is that's going to play into a player's head. It's just going to. We've seen it with other players that have played on really bad teams and got traded and kind of meshed back to what they were before. And Robert has looked better recently too, swinging the bat. He's shown off more power. But what you're getting him for is that power. He's got speed, and he plays a pretty good defensive center field. So I know we hadn't talked about Cedric Mullins a ton, but he's obviously one of the older guys available for center field. But
Sure.
again, depends on the price. But I also think Mullins is probably an upgrade on what they have currently too.
Sure.
But there's probably 5-6 bats that we haven't even mentioned, and no one has mentioned that Stearns is going to talk to teams about tomorrow, because that's what David Stearns does. And there's a chance that he ends up getting a bat that we haven't talked about tonight, and Mets
Sure.
fans are super excited about it. So I think all in all, when we talk again tomorrow night after the trade deadline, Mets fans are going to be pretty happy about what Stearns did.
Yeah, no, agreed. I'm excited. I'm excited for what tomorrow brings. Just in general, pretty interesting trade deadline. Shohei Ohtani left the mound with the trainer before pitching in the fourth inning, left the game. So, that a huge implication for the National League if that's anything serious. Just going to be an interesting day tomorrow. And like I said, we'll catch you again tomorrow night when the trade deadline's over, and we'll see what the Mets kind of final haul is here. But that's going to do it for tonight. We'll catch you again tomorrow night after the deadline. And as always, everybody, let's go Mets.